really happy now to hand over to Jess King, who's a kind of probably won't want me to say, but a real specialist in this area across Somerset. So Jess, okay if I hand over to you?
Like Steve said, I'm Jessica King. I'm one of the wider safeguarding team managers, so I cover Taunton and West Somerset. But it might be good to briefly say that I'm sure you're all aware of the changes in children's social care and the family solutions sort of package that we're offering. So the wider safeguarding team is generally where exploitation will sit within children's social care. So there's 4 of me. I was the lead social worker for child exploitation, but now I manage Chloe Deverell, who undertakes that role. So the purpose of my part of this presentation today is to speak to you about the current child exploitation picture in Somerset. So I wanted to speak to you a bit about the themes that we're identifying. As you know, it's quite a broad topic, but I think it's just really important to keep in mind that this is child abuse. So although it looks very different to what we're normally faced with in children's social care, which is usually harm from a family member or more specifically a parent, that may go alongside, but it's really, really important that we acknowledge that exploitation is often or generally always significant harm. So the young people that we will be thinking about have been groomed, coerced into criminal or sexual acts. And young people don't always know that they're being exploited, which is what makes it probably so difficult for us to intervene in. Exploitation obviously takes many forms. I'm sure that you've all gone to Andrula Nicolaou's training, which is offered by the partnership around what exploitation specifically is. It can include sexual exploitation, and there's various models around what sexual exploitation might look like. Criminal exploitation, and that includes like a really hot topic, I guess, around county lines. We've obviously got to consider the peer-on-peer or child-on-child abuse. So a lot of our victims of exploitation go on to be what you might call alpha victims. So it's where they've definitely been exploited themselves and then are coerced into exploiting others or other young people that might be in their peer group or might be known to them. And other key terms that are really good to keep in mind are the considerations around, is this modern day slavery or trafficking? So we need to keep in mind, has that child been moved from one area to another, one room to another, one part of the country to another in order for that exploitation to take place? Or have they been coerced into moving something between those lines? So in Somerset as well, we're also seeing an emerging theme around serious youth violence and weapon crimes. That's all something that we need to develop our learning around. I'll take you on to the picture of what exploitation looks like in Somerset in terms of children's social care data. I'm sure that it won't be a surprise that it's difficult to gauge a definite understanding of who is a victim of exploitation, and we'll go through means and ways of trying to identify that later in this presentation. Due to a lot of the harm being hidden, we don't think we're scratching the surface in terms of who on our caseloads might be subject to child exploitation. Obviously, don't take these as this is definitely the amount of children, and obviously we'll think about who's open to the family intervention service where parenting might not be such an issue, or there might not be issues of domestic abuse or neglect which are featured. This is just who are the highest risk in terms of being open to us. So on average, we find that around half of the overall number of young people affected by exploitation in Somerset are actually children looked after. Us as corporate parents, we really need to understand why our young people who we look after are vulnerable to exploitation. We obviously know that you can be any gender, any race, any age, you can have various cultures, everyone is at risk of exploitation, and when I say everyone, that's class as well. We need to bear in mind our young people in private schools, because that's been an emerging theme as well. So in Somerset, we're currently identifying a high number of young people who are being exploited, and that exploitation would be criminal. We need to understand that that's also the national picture, but this also worries me slightly. I'd be worried about, are we not identifying other factors, especially around sexual exploitation? We need to be aware of sexual exploitation, and that was the training emphasis, but we're seeing a big picture around county lines and the impact that has on our children in Somerset. This is not just something that's happening in London or major cities. We're seeing our own young people being used by these criminal gangs. The Children's Society are reporting that children as young as 7 are being seen as victims. So here in Somerset and within my team, we've seen a child as young as 9. So one of the common factors around the younger children being involved is that we've seen a number of young people who have been provided things like vapes. They then go and sell those on. So it's like a little test for these younger children. How successful can they be in selling something that's not as conspicuous as Class A's? So we've got 4 out of 5 parents are worried about county lines in their area across the UK. And we're also noticing an increase in violence associated with these crimes. So that's coming to the police attention a lot, and young people are being found with weapons, which is obviously a criminal offence in itself. We are seeing more and more of that, and that's having an impact on the youth justice team as well. So this might look a little bit bizarre. So there's 4 categories that are shown here, and this is how we actually break down what level of harm a child might be exposed to. For example, risk aware. So that looks like a really large number, doesn't it? So that's young people who we feel that might be on the periphery of groups that we're aware of, so peer groups that are exposed to peer-on-peer abuse, or we know that they're a known associate to someone who has been exploited, and that risk of being coerced into that behaviour as well. But CE harm, then again, we feel that harm is increasing and there's clear signs that child might be exploited. But they're the behaviours that we're seeing at the moment, that it's not the concrete evidence. When you get to pursue, that obviously looks like a small number. So that's where we generally know that there is a perpetrator. So that's where we can solidly say that young person is being exploited by another, either young person or adult. And of course, we all know that there's an adult at the top of somewhere. So in terms of the geographical areas, we'd just like to give you a bit more insight into Somerset as a whole. So we can establish what areas have the youngest people at risk and what level of harm. But also, it's important to understand that these figures are different levels of harm. So, for example, in Mendip, we know that there's a higher rate of risk aware. So either those social workers are very good at picking up the early signs, or that there's less of a risk there, but we're aware that it could lead to something. Sedgemoor looks like it's got small numbers, but actually all of the banners there are at the higher level or working towards that. So you can see a different picture. So Taunton and West Somerset, Sedgemoor and South Somerset, we know that there's higher risks involved in those areas, but that doesn't mean that in Mendip that our young people aren't at risk. So I wanted to give you a national picture as well, just so that you've got something to compare that to. So within children's social care as well, we don't have a specific team, unlike Louise, who's very lucky, that work purely with child victims, but we do embed training across our practice. So when I spoke about Chloe earlier, who I supervise, she's the lead social worker for child exploitation. So she is available to the youth justice team, to FIS, and to all of our social workers at any point to provide consultation. She ensures that we've got the best child in need plan, child protection plan, the best assessment framework in place for any child who we feel is at risk of exploitation. We also work in partnership very closely with Avon and Somerset Police, who I expect that you met in another session. They provide us support around a lot of disruption to the highest risk perpetrators. We've also got Bernardo's, who provide a criminal and sexual exploitation service to our highest risk young people. So we've got Roots, which is the criminal exploitation and serious youth violence service. And then we have BASE, which is our sexual exploitation service. Now, obviously, sexual exploitation and criminal don't always come independently of each other. They could be at risk of both. So both of those services are well equipped and managed by the same team manager so that they can provide work across both areas. We also work really closely with our partners in the VRU. So the VRU is the Violence Reduction Unit, and they've got lots of data available to us to see who's an emerging risk in terms of serious youth violence and exploitation, significantly around county lines and criminal exploitation. We obviously know that it's imperative that we work together. So Chloe meets with leaders of those services every 2 weeks in order to make sure that we are working with the correct children. So if we move on to the next slide, it's just worth reminding you. So we've spoken, haven't we, about how difficult it can be to identify exploitation. So this neatly explains what we might be looking for in terms of behaviours. So we might not know that the perpetrator is a county line stealer who's really clever, criminal background, that is exploiting our young person that we're concerned about. But what we might see is those social skills are not there. They don't have a secure attachment with their caregivers. They're often hungry. Their basic needs aren't being met. They look dirty, or their clothes are dirty. Their physical safety is clearly not present because they've got bruises or injuries. They've got a real need to belong. They don't have positive peer relationship. There's also things like their emotions are significantly up and down, and that's a change in behaviour perhaps. They've got low self-esteem. There's been a real change in pattern of attendance. Anything like that, that's what you're looking for. So we often see behaviours, but we don't want to judge a child and say that behaviour is just because that's what they feel like doing, or they're rude, or they're not being nice to their friends, or things like that. We need to really see beyond that. So I'm going to take you through our service approach to adolescence to really combine some of that thinking. So this was developed by Chloe Cappy-Jones, who's an operation manager, and myself, in terms of how we can provide the best service to our adolescents. It was developed to really give like a succinct breakdown as to how we want our practitioners to be in place. So we've got the trauma-informed approach that we'd like to underpin our practice. So for young people who use our services, we're aware that they've experienced a lot of trauma, loss, grief, or abuse. So when they come to our attention, obviously there's a risk. So we need to be mindful about what's happening internally for these young people, their feelings, their thoughts, and their ability to understand, our ability to understand the context that their behaviours are built in. So we've, like we said about earlier, swearing, shouting, criminality, school exclusions, and what we would always think about as being hard to engage families that we just can't get into. But in terms of a trauma-informed approach, it's just important to remember that we're not focusing on what is being done to a child or what that is doing to a child, but rather to identify what needs are not being met. If there is a need that is not being met, there is someone out there who wants to come in, meet that need, and become the perpetrator. So if we have children, like we're saying, with those unmet needs, that leaves them vulnerable to exploitation. But those needs also determine the appropriate interventions and resources to be able to prevent this. So focusing on the behaviour as a crisis misses the bigger picture and what we need to do. So in order to to understand what those needs are, we need to work within a framework that allows us to be relationship based. And Louise touched on this earlier. Her team don't say, I can't engage that young person. They go back and they go back and they go back and make sure that that child knows that we care. So we obviously need to work together. There's small snippets that each agency has. For example, school know that they're not attending. Police know that these young people are being seen with a group of young people who we know already are being exploited. That information provides that analysis really of what could be happening for that child. And we're really, really mindful of our language and how we write our assessments and how we write our plans. And we'd always want to do our plans in conjunction with the young people themselves. I would not want to see in any of my social workers' reports that, one example, this child has been sexually active since the age of 12. Well, we all know the age of consent. That's not accurate, and that's victim blaming. One that I think is harder to address at the moment, or harder to tackle, that child is drug running, that child is dealing, and that's his lifestyle choice. We need to robustly challenge language like that. So I know obviously this is not solely for social workers, and this is for our partners, which is absolutely amazing. Yourselves and Children's Social Care, we all use the same child exploitation screening tool. It's just in different formats. So for us, it's on our system. For you, it's available on the partnership website. So we've recently reviewed and revamped the screening tool. So it has a list of risks, and it's broken down into different headings such as grooming, family and social, and online safety. So the screening tool asks you to identify if behaviours are seen in a child. So like we said earlier, you don't need to know who is exploiting that child. You just need to know that that's your theory. That needs to be as well, when you identify that, has it been seen in the last 6 months? So recent information is really useful. It will hopefully break down as well what you're actually seeing. What you need to do is use your professional judgment rather than just think, well, the CARDA dash risk assessment that you would do with domestic abuse victims, you need 14 plus for a MARIC referral. You could literally just have one of these, and one of these behaviours could be you have identified that they've been seen with a certain person, and that leads you to believe that that child is exploited, and that would warrant your referral. It depends on the risk. Or you have seen that a child has been provided with really nice trainers, a really nice Gucci bag, and they've been seen with drugs. It doesn't need to be a massive list of concerns. It can literally just be that one.